Athanasia, the name her mother had lovingly bestowed upon her, carried within it the meaning of eternity. The princess, with eyes as clear and blue as crystal, an undeniable mark of royal blood, was born without even the faintest trace of magical power. Yet the queen firmly believed that, even as a mere mortal, her daughter could still find simple happiness in this world. In her final moments, the queen gently placed a last kiss upon her daughter's forehead and transferred her own magic into the fragile little body. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she choked out her final words. "My beloved child, stay by your father's side for me." Moments later, the chamber was flooded with guards and handmaidens. The passing of Queen Diana drove the king to issue a cruel decree. All of her belongings were to be confiscated and burned, and the final order, colder than any before, the princess was never to appear before her father again. From that day onward, Athanasia's world was confined to the Scarlet Stone Palace, her only company a handful of servants. Rumors spread throughout the royal court that the king had never once cared for his own flesh and blood. Though still a child, Athanasia somehow understood those cruel words. In her restless sleep, she often dreamed of strange visions, someone softly calling her name, a crystal containing a book appearing before her eyes. Driven by curiosity, she bit into it. It was tasteless, meaningless, until the crystal shattered, releasing a blinding light that unveiled the mysterious book within. Information surged into her mind in a flood, revealing a tragic future. Athanasia would be accused of practicing forbidden dark magic and of plotting to murder the emperor, her own father. In the dream, she cried and pleaded desperately, insisting that she was innocent, that she only wished for her father to look at her just once. But all that answered her was Emperor Claw's cold, merciless voice. "I have no daughter. Before me stands only a filthy sinner." In the end, Athanasia was sentenced to lifelong imprisonment in the Holy Tower, the prison of the damned. Broken by the absence of love she had longed for, she chose disappearance over despair. Athanasia awoke with a start, bursting into tears after yet another nightmare she could not escape. Her wet nurse, Lillian, the chief housekeeper and daughter of a count, also the dearest friend of the late Queen Diana, held her tightly and soothed her. Thanks to Lillian's constant care, Athanasia managed to endure the cold indifference that surrounded her. She gradually came to understand that this was a world steeped in magic. People often spoke of a powerful sorcerer who resided in the Holy Tower, one strong enough to destroy an entire kingdom. Lillian would tell her stories of this legend, and whenever she asked who was the mightiest in the world, little Athanasia would point toward her father's silhouette. William, one of the close attendants, once teased her for being clever enough to recognize the king so young. But in Athanasia's heart, he was merely the dark figure from her dreams, the one who had forsaken her. She could never believe that the book had glorified him as a great emperor. To her, he was nothing more than a cruel tyrant. Just the thought of exile made her small heart ache with tears. 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. One morning, Athanasia woke amidst a pile of scattered books and overheard the servants whispering. Curious, she asked, and learned they were preparing flowers for decorations at Lillian's request. Delighted, she offered to help. The little princess's cheerful excitement lifted everyone's spirits. While happily gathering flowers, she happened upon an unfamiliar maid whose eyes flashed with a hint of hostility. The woman feigned confusion, claiming to be lost, unaware that the child before her was the princess herself. When Athanasia innocently inquired further, the maid accidentally mentioned searching for treasure. The little girl giggled and said, "If you want to steal something, you can just say so." In her innocence, Athanasia led the maid around the palace, pointing at rice, bread, and sunflowers, saying these were the true treasures, things invisible to ordinary eyes. The maid grew increasingly frustrated until she caught sight of Hannah carrying a tray of sweets decorated with precious gems. Her greedy eyes lit up instantly. Athanasia ran up, pouting and begging for some chocolate. Hannah, unable to resist such adorable pleading, gave in immediately. Even Shasha, who tried to hold firm because it wasn't yet dinner time, melted under the little princess's charm. With just a tug on her skirt and a sweet kiss on the cheek, all scolding vanished, and Shasha herself ended up handing the chocolate over. Before leaving, Athanasia mischievously claimed that Lillian was calling them, creating the perfect chance for the scheming maid to rummage around. The thief ransacked the place, stuffing every last jewel into her apron, but Athanasia calmly stepped forward, her voice soft yet resolute. "I'm sorry, but those things belong to me." The woman instantly pulled out a kitchen knife, threatening her. The young princess darted away, narrowly dodging the throne blade, and yanked on a hidden cord cleverly fastened to the ceiling. "The game's over." At her words, the decorations above came crashing down, trapping the greedy thief beneath them. Moments later, Lillian and the maids came running, only to find a bizarre scene. the villainous servant pinned under the fallen ornaments, while the little princess stood tall, proud like a victorious knight. After the intruder was taken away for questioning, it was revealed that she had infiltrated the palace under a false identity. Athanasia felt immense satisfaction, especially knowing Lillian was safe. For in her prophetic dream, she had once seen that very maid kill her. Now she realized that the future could be changed. The princess carried the bloodline of magic, yet she herself knew not how to wield it. Her true secret lay elsewhere, in her mysterious gift of foresight. And though the road ahead was filled with danger, she vowed never to bow her head in surrender. That same night, when Felix delivered the final report to the emperor, he timidly mentioned that the princess had caught a thief in the Ruby Palace. Claw, however, merely dismissed it with indifference, unwilling to waste even a moment on such trivial matters. Meanwhile, within the magic tower, Lucas suddenly stirred from his slumber. He could sense it. Someone out there was beginning to stir the fate of the Abelian Empire itself, and he felt compelled to seek the source. By the age of 9, Athanasia finally met her father for the first time. "This is my only family," she reminded herself, and devoted every effort to earning even a single ounce of his affection. But when she turned 14, at her coming-of-age ceremony, all hope shattered. For by then, the emperor had another daughter, Janae, a girl of angelic beauty who effortlessly captured everyone's hearts, even the cold one of the emperor himself. Yearning for love, the pitiful princess of the tale turned to dark magic, and was ultimately forsaken by her father. She was exiled, and her life ended in the shadowed Holy Tower. Athanasia winced upon hearing that part of the story. She was certain that the doomed princess described was herself. Though merely a side character in a tragic fate, she couldn't help but grieve for her own end. "No," she thought, "I will never accept such a destiny." She swore she would break those chains. After the theft incident, the palace kitchen became heavily guarded, making it harder for her to stash away any money for escape. Yet Athanasia refused to give up. From a young age, she had been fascinated by precious things. Knowing this, Lillian often gifted her gold-plated toys. The little princess used her sparkling eyes to charm the maids into giving her chocolates. But what she truly wanted were the golden pins decorating them, which she secretly collected as her private treasure hoard. According to her prophetic dream, she would meet her father again at age 9. Thus, all she needed to do was flee before that time came. And of course, she planned to take Lillian with her. As she washed her hands by the fountain, she gazed into her reflection in the clear water and recalled what others often said, that she was the spitting image of her late mother, except for her eyes, which were her father's inheritance. Those eyes were said to be exclusive to the royal family, yet she possessed no magical power. Perhaps she thought that was the reason her father despised her. Everyone believed she alone bore those rare eyes, but Athanasia knew better. There was still Jeanette in the future. She told herself not to dwell on it. All that mattered was gathering enough jewels to leave this place behind. But as security grew tighter, she was forced to start hiding her treasures outside her quarters. One day, by chance, she wandered into a strange room, not as lavish as the Ruby Palace, almost like a storage hall. When she returned, Athanasia overheard the maids whispering among themselves that by order of His Majesty, the Ruby Palace was to be thoroughly inspected, especially her chamber. Alarmed, she hurried back to check on her treasure. Fortunately, everything was still intact. She quickly wrapped the jewels securely, tied them around her body, and slipped out in secret. But when she reached her hiding place, she found a squirrel nibbling on her precious hoard. Panicking, she used some peanuts to lure it away. And luckily, it worked. Realizing the forest was no longer safe, she thought of a new hiding spot, the abandoned storage hall she had once stumbled upon. Stepping inside, she saw a few golden statues and, thinking they were made of solid gold, curiously leaned in and gave one a bite. Suddenly, a low, cold voice echoed from behind her. "And since when has this little worm been wandering into my palace?" Startled, she turned around, and her eyes met a pair that mirrored her own. At that instant, she understood. It was her father, the emperor himself. But why were they meeting now? In her prophetic dream, their first encounter wasn't supposed to happen for another 4 years. Claw studied the young girl's face, the very reflection of that woman's, and gently lifted her chin. Felix, alarmed, tried to intervene, but the emperor had already spoken her name. Athanasia. His fingers pinched her soft cheeks playfully, toying with her round, bun-like face. Athanasia was completely bewildered. In her dream, her father had never once looked her way, yet here he was, so different from what she remembered. Then, unexpectedly, he invited her to have tea with him. Panicked, she tried to flee but was immediately caught. In their brief struggle, her pouch of jewels slipped from her hands and fell to the floor. She froze. Her secret had been exposed. Sitting opposite her father, Athanasia trembled, feeling like a frightened rabbit before a mighty golden dragon. She feared he was waiting for her confession. Whether it was theft or the bite marks on the statue, either sin would be enough for punishment. When she stayed silent, he asked softly if she even knew how to speak. The little princess smiled brightly and replied, "Of course I can talk." He frowned slightly. "Then why have you been silent all this time?" Felix quickly offered her a sweet pastry, explaining that children were often shy around strangers. The emperor waved him away coldly, ordering, "Leave us." Athanasia panicked, terrified of being left alone with the emperor. Then he asked if she knew the meaning of her own name. Without waiting for an answer, he explained, "Athanasia means undying, eternal. It is the title of a ruler from the Obalian line. Only the rightful heirs deserve to bear a name of such high honor. Even I, in my youth, was never granted such a title. For Diana to name her child so boldly, that was an act of courage rare among women." Athanasia fidgeted nervously, fearing he might disapprove of her. For she knew well, she was not the queen's daughter, and thus had no legitimate claim to inheritance. He, the man who had risen to power by striking down his own tyrant brother and seizing the throne, was still whispered about throughout the empire. People said he lacked a name worthy of a true emperor. Perhaps she thought that was why he hated hers. He ordered her to eat. Athanasia, trembling, said softly, "The cake looks delicious," and nervously picked up her spoon. In her heart, she feared that if she displeased him, he would punish the innocent maids. All she wanted was to return to the Ruby Palace and see Lillian again. Then he asked who had taught her manners. The question seemed to stir a memory in him. He recalled Lillian of Jock, the woman who had once appeared before him so bravely, pleading to be allowed to care for the princess. Both Lillian and Diana had been among the few women who dared stand before him and still lived to tell the tale. At last, he looked directly into Athanasia's eyes and asked, "Do you know who I am?" Caught off guard, she hesitated for a long moment before tremblingly answering, "You're my papa, aren't you?" For a fleeting instant, the emperor's cold gaze flickered. Something strange, almost gentle, flashed in his eyes. Athanasia, however, panicked and berated herself. "Why did I call him Papa? I should have said Your Majesty. I should have called him the Emperor." Meanwhile, back at the Ruby Palace, Lillian was just about to send servants to look for her when Athanasia returned, Felix following close behind. Hearing Felix report that the Emperor intended to summon her again, Athanasia was so frightened that she trembled all over, grew nauseous, and even vomited from anxiety. Later, Athanasia once again followed Lillian into the imperial chamber, to stand before her father, the Emperor. In the silent grand hall, Claus sat tall upon his throne, majestic as a mountain. When he saw Lillian step forward to pay her respects, he suddenly realized it had been 5 years since their last meeting. Athanasia, however, felt a wave of nausea rise within her. The world might praise him as a great monarch, but in her eyes, he was nothing more than a cold and heartless man. He rose to his feet, making excuses, saying that he had been too busy with state affairs to care for. Athanasia knew perfectly well those were lies, but she couldn't be bothered to argue. She was doing fine on her own. All she wished was for him not to interfere in her life. Yet his gaze suddenly fixed upon her. Athanasia stiffened, secretly wishing she could turn into a mushroom growing in the corner of the hall, unnoticed by all. But that wish shattered quickly. After that day, he announced he would personally look after her and grant her the treatment befitting a princess. Athanasia was stunned. From then on, she had to see him every single day, even sitting down for tea and sweets under his watchful eyes. In her nightmares, all her tragedies began from the moment she faced him. She was certain that if she had avoided him, her fate might have been different. And yet now she was forced to confront him day after day. Annoying as it was, when her eyes fell upon the table full of cakes, she couldn't help but swallow her saliva. So, this is what they call a princess's privilege, she thought to herself, though suspicion soon crept in. What if all of it was poisoned? Just then, his deep voice broke the silence. "Why aren't you eating? Or do you think I've poisoned them?" Athanasia froze, startled, as if he could read her mind. She hurriedly replied that Lillian had warned her too many sweets would cause cavities. He gave a faint, mocking smile. "You didn't seem to worry about that yesterday when you ate plenty. Did your teeth hurt?" Cornered, Athanasia finally took a bite. The sweetness spread across her tongue, her eyes sparkled, and before she knew it, her hands kept reaching for more. When she finished the last cake, the king suddenly said he liked seeing her like this and wanted her to have tea with him every day. Athanasia was stunned. From that moment on, her fate changed. She had to face him daily. She couldn't understand why he suddenly decided to play the role of a loving father. The anxiety weighed on her so heavily she could barely walk straight. And yet, there were strange moments of gentleness. When she accidentally bit into a gold ornament, he didn't scold her. When she bowed awkwardly, he said nothing harsh. Every time she made a mistake, she thought her life would end. Yet, curiously, he never once grew angry. Athanasia began to wonder, could her father be trying to make amends? Though uncertain, the fear in her heart slowly began to fade. One day, as Lillian helped her change clothes, she told Athanasia that she would accompany the king to the lake to view the flowers. When she met him, she heard him murmur that she had grown plumper than before. Unsure whether it was a compliment or not, she quickly replied, "You look wonderful too." The words startled Lillian and Felix, but Claw only remained calm and told her to follow him. He led her along the lakeshore. Athanasia panted, running as she picked the bright flowers, intending to show them to Lillian later. At last, they stopped by the clear, still lake, where a small boat was waiting. Lillian whispered her concern, reminding him that Athanasia still feared the water. Claw reassured her that it would be fine, but his fine came in the form of grabbing Athanasia by the collar and lifting her onto the boat. At least, when the little girl dangled above the water, she looked rather adorable to him. Athanasia sat curled up, uneasy under her father's deep, unwavering gaze. His eyes were so intense she could hardly breathe, unsure how to respond. Finally, he asked what she was thinking about. Flustered, she blurted out, "Papa, your hair shines so beautifully. Athanasia likes it." Even as she spoke, tears welled in her eyes, for every time she saw that golden hair, she thought of his gold. He realized that his daughter liked shiny things, and told her that her jewels were still safely kept with him, and that she could come take them anytime she wished. But Athanasia never had the courage to step into his chambers. Time passed. The fragrance of flowers drifted through the air, the scenery deceptively peaceful. Athanasia began to feel her heart lighten. But then she noticed, why was the boat gliding across the lake without anyone rowing? It dawned on her at once. It must be her father's magic. Her gaze lingered on his turquoise eyes, and she couldn't help but wonder, were hers the same shade? If she could wield magic like him, would her father perhaps love her more? Out on the lake, as sunlight shimmered across the surface, Athanasia found herself captivated by a vivid blue lotus. She reached out to pick it, but the moment her fingers brushed the petals, the lotus yanked her down into the water. An unseen force dragged her under, pulling her deeper and deeper toward the abyss. In her despair, she could only hope, "Father will save me." Yet, in that terrifying instant, her mind flashed with the image of him turning his back, leaving her behind. Her will faltered as the sinister vines coiled tighter, dragging her into the darkness. Little did she know, her father did not hesitate for even a second. He dove in after her, his strong arms wrapping tightly around her fragile body. Athanasia's skin was ice cold, yet within her father's embrace, she felt a faint, fleeting warmth. When they surfaced, she coughed violently, gasping for air, and through her blurred vision, she saw him, drenched from head to toe. She could hardly believe it. Her father had truly saved her. Felix hurriedly offered a cloak, but Claw brushed it aside. With a mere flick of his hand, he used magic to dry Athanasia's clothes. His voice was calm but commanding as he said, "Starting tomorrow, Felix, you will teach the princess how to swim. It would be disgraceful if my daughter were to drown." Athanasia froze. My daughter. He had called her by such a tender title. As he turned to leave, a sudden wave of dark energy surged around him, halting his step for a brief moment. Yet he said nothing and walked away in silence. Back in her chambers, Athanasia felt both exhausted and chilled. The memory of that afternoon by the lake replayed again and again in her mind. Lillian gently explained that the flower she had touched was called urine, an illusionary lotus that lures living beings with its beauty. Normally harmless, it becomes dangerous when too many bloom together, and only those without magical power fall under its spell. Meanwhile, deep in the night, Claw returned to the lotus-covered lake, where the illusory blossoms took the form of Diana. She smiled softly at him, radiating warmth and serenity. He had long believed his heart was numb to all emotion. Yet, in that moment, he realized he did not despise his daughter after all. As he stood caught between shadow and memory, Felix could only watch in silence, secretly praying that someday light would guide the king back from his darkness. The next day, Athanasia was assigned new attendants to serve her. Before her, Felix knelt down, officially accepting the position of her temporary guardian knight. He solemnly swore his oath to devote himself entirely to her service and protection. Athanasia woke up in Felix's arms. He had come to fetch her under the emperor's orders. His Majesty wished to have breakfast with his daughter. The little girl blinked in curiosity, wondering why her father had no guards with him. "Why isn't anyone protecting him?" she thought. "Why does Felix only guard me?" Felix simply smiled and replied softly, "The emperor needs no guards. His magic alone is the strongest shield there is." He said nothing more, only gently led Athanasia to Claw's chambers, adding, "His Majesty will surely be delighted if you're the one to wake him on such a lovely morning." Athanasia grew anxious and flustered, uncertain what she should do. Her gaze wandered across the vast chamber, filled with treasures and rare artifacts. Even a magnificent map made of gold shimmered on the wall. In the corner, Claw was slumped asleep on a chair. She wanted to wake him, but also to tease him, as if to take revenge in advance for the cruelty he would one day show her. So she poked his cheek playfully, tugged gently at his face, and when he began to stir, she softly hummed a lullaby, the same tender tune she'd heard long ago, to lull him back to sleep. Strangely, it worked. When Claw finally awoke, his usually stoic face was tinged faintly red from his daughter's mischievous play. Quick-witted as ever, Athanasia hurried to change the subject, remarking that the palace was enormous and full of wondrous things she'd never seen before. Claw nodded, granting her permission to explore the palace freely. Just then, Felix entered with news. A noble requested an audience with both the Emperor and Princess Athanasia. Claw immediately refused, saying he alone would handle the matter. Before leaving, he instructed that from now on, Athanasia must share breakfast with him every morning. Given her newfound freedom, Athanasia wandered through the palace, marveling at its beauty while quietly searching for any trace of her mother. Her memories of Diana were faint, like mist. She had been far too young when her mother passed away. She found countless portraits of her father, but not a single one of her mother. That is, until she stumbled into a secluded room where a large painting was hidden beneath a heavy cloth as though deliberately concealed. Just as she reached for it, voices echoed from the corridor, a few noble women gossiping. How absurd, one sneered, that His Majesty once intended to marry a woman who couldn't even use magic. Clearly, they were speaking of Diana. Another woman laughed cruelly. Well, he did make a dancer his empress once. Perhaps anyone could become queen if they pleased him enough. But before their laughter could fade, Claw appeared. The three women immediately fell to their knees, trembling in terror. His voice was deep and cold as ice. No one is ever to speak that name, Diana, again. Meanwhile, Athanasia lifted the cloth from the painting. What she saw made her heart ache. It was her mother's portrait, though burned and ruined, with only faint fragments of color left behind. She stood silently before it, her eyes misty, her chest heavy with sorrow. That night, weary and heartsick, Athanasia lay down and lulled herself to sleep with the same lullaby she had sung to her father that morning. When dawn came, she once again shared breakfast with him. This time, she entered confidently, bowed politely, and said with a bright smile, "I'm so happy to see you, Father." Her sweet manners made the maids whisper in awe. Only Claw remained silent, replying briefly, his calm eyes revealing nothing. In every conversation, it was always Athanasia who chattered cheerfully, while he listened quietly. She began to wonder, does Father find me boring? Or maybe... As long as I don't mention Mother, things will stay peaceful between us like this. One day, curiosity got the better of her. She wanted to know what the tea her father always drank tasted like. She asked if she could try some. Felix hesitated, warning that it was too strong for a child, but since Claw had been indulging his daughter lately, he gave a small nod of approval. Felix poured her a small cup. Athanasia took a sip and smiled softly. It was as if flowers were blooming in her mouth. That innocent remark caused the atmosphere to suddenly fall silent. For Diana, her mother, had once said the exact same words about that very tea. It was a specialty from Diana's homeland, and that memory struck Cloud deeply. He didn't respond. He only stared quietly at the cup before him, as though he could see the shadow of someone long gone reflected in its surface. Athanasia sensed that something had changed in the air. She vaguely understood that she had said something she shouldn't have, but she couldn't have known that she had just unknowingly repeated her mother's words. That night, overwhelmed by a melancholy she couldn't explain, she gathered all her drawings of her mother, the few fragments of memory she had left, and set them on fire. The ashes scattered across the room, and through the dim smoke, a silent figure appeared, kneeling to pick up the tiny remains. From that day onward, Claw no longer joined her in the mornings. Day after day, Athanasia waited, but her father never came. Slowly, she stopped wanting breakfast, even losing her appetite altogether. One afternoon, while quietly walking along the corridor, she accidentally overheard Felix talking to Lillian. They said that it was only natural for the princess to want to know about her mother, especially since everything related to Diana had been erased from the palace. Felix said he intended to ask the Emperor's permission to use magic to transfer his memories, so that Athanasia could see her mother through his recollections. But upon hearing that, Athanasia hurried over in panic. "Please don't do that. I don't want Father to hate me." Felix bent down, his gaze softening. I swear on your mother's honor, the king does not hate you, nor does he hate Diana. Let me show you proof." He led her along the corridor, pointing to the palace walls. "You once asked why the emperor doesn't keep guards, didn't you? It's because this entire place is protected by the strongest magical barrier he ever created." He released a light spell attack, and immediately, a transparent barrier shimmered into view, encasing the palace. Only two people were ever allowed to move freely within this protection, Princess Athanasia and Queen Diana, because His Majesty trusted them completely. And yet now he refuses to let anyone even speak her name. No one knows why. But the one who picked up the ashes that night was Claw himself. He quietly used magic to restore every single drawing you burned and told himself, "Just one more year, only one more year, and I'll forget Diana." Why? No one could ever understand. After hearing Felix's words, Athanasia decided to go see her father. She stepped timidly into his chamber and said softly, "I haven't seen you for days, father. I missed you so much. Philip said you might be able to show me, mother. But if you're busy, I'll leave right away." As she turned to go, Claw reached out, stopping her, then lifted her into his arms, gazing at her for a long while. This child grows bolder each day, just like her mother, he thought. He set her down gently on the bed and spoke in a low voice. "You must have lost sleep these past few nights. Sing me that song from before. I was still awake when you teased me. What, remember? You pinched my cheek." Athanasia flushed scarlet, stammering, I forgot the lyrics." Claw smiled faintly, his eyes glinting with playful warmth. "Lying to the king is a serious crime, you know." With no way out, she softly began to sing. Claw raised his hand, casting a spell that filled the room with a gentle warmth, the light glimmering like stars. Under that tender radiance, peace descended over the room. Athanasia's voice faded as she slowly drifted into sleep. Claw brushed her hair aside and, with quiet care, used magic to project a fragment of his own memory, allowing her to see her mother's face, her gentle smile, and her eyes full of happiness. She also saw him, the once stoic man, sharing tranquil moments with the woman he had loved. Father and daughter fell asleep side by side. Our little Princess Athanasia has grown wiser and more mature. But with that growth came new troubles, most notably the fact that she possessed no magical power whatsoever. Even so, her father, Emperor Claw, loved her more with each passing day. Yet Athanasia, ever curious, began delving into mysterious books of magic, books so dangerous that a single careless mistake could spell great trouble. After a peaceful afternoon spent with her father, Claw awoke from a nap when Felix came to announce a visitor. The emperor frowned slightly, as if already guessing who it was. At the same time, Athanasia was just waking up. In the grand hall, the visitor turned out to be Duke Amphius. With utmost courtesy, he stated that the princess had grown up and now needed a companion, someone who could study alongside her and keep her company. Then, with practiced subtlety, he recommended his own son, 3 years older than the princess, claiming the boy could help her with her studies. But anyone with a hint of awareness could see through his intentions. The Duke was merely seeking to curry favor with the emperor and move closer to power. Athanasia entered the room, her eyes briefly glancing at Amphius, and instantly she saw through his ambition. In her previous life, this very man had elevated Janae Margarita to the title of Princess of Abalia, while she herself had been exiled in disgrace. Acting as though nothing was amiss, Athanasia walked over, sat comfortably in her father's lap, and playfully said that she didn't need a tutor or a study companion, for she already knew many things. Claw chuckled softly at her words. However, Amphius was not ready to give up. With a mocking tone, he said, "And what about magic? Is the princess so wise that she no longer needs that either?" His words carried a cutting implication that made the air turn cold. Everyone knew Athanasia could not wield magic. Claw's expression darkened immediately. He coldly interrupted, declaring that his daughter needed no one's help, and brought the meeting to an end. Though Amphius's words were unpleasant, there was truth in them. Athanasia was indeed brilliant beyond compare, yet utterly devoid of magical power. In the empire where magic defined one's status, this was something that could easily invite scorn. Determined to understand why, she sought out a magical measuring device, a mystical spinning ring that indicated one's magical energy by how fast it turned. But when Athanasia tried it, the ring remained completely still, not moving even an inch. It was baffling, for her father Claw possessed the strongest magic in the entire empire, and her late mother had been praised as the dancer of magic. How could their daughter have none at all? Time passed swiftly. 2 years later, Lillian went to the market to buy fruit for the princess. Throughout the capital, people spoke fondly of Athanasia's brilliance and charm, certain that she would soon be officially recognized as heir to the throne. Now, within the Grand Library, Athanasia softly recited an ancient poem, her clear voice echoing gently through the quiet air, while Claw listened in thoughtful silence. Suddenly, Amphius appeared once more, wearing that same insincere smile. The princess has grown so much, more lovely each time I see her. Surely now she's ready for a study companion? It needn't be my son this time. I've found a girl her age, Janae Margarita. At the mention of that name, Athanasia's expression changed at once. She wanted to hear nothing more of Janae, nor did she want that girl anywhere near her father. Her voice turned cold as she replied, I already know far more than she does. There's nothing she could possibly teach me. Then, before anyone could react, Athanasia began reciting the clauses of Obalia's imperial constitution one by one, leaving Amphius speechless and utterly humiliated. As he prepared to retreat, he tried one last attempt at small talk, saying that Jeanette loved to read and that a famous book from another kingdom had just been published. Janae was eagerly awaiting its translated version. Athanasia smiled faintly. Oh, is that so? She said, handing him a beautifully bound book, the very translation he had just mentioned, with the name of the translator clearly written on the cover. Athanasia. Once again, the little princess of Obalia amazed everyone, wise, graceful, and unshakably composed. Amphius could only force a bitter smile and retreat in embarrassed silence. And once more, we see Princess Athanasia amidst the deep green forest. She was deeply focused, trying to awaken the dormant magic hidden within her body. In her hands was an ancient grimoire, a forbidden tome containing the long-lost incantations of a legendary sorcerer whose very name had nearly vanished from history. Rumor had it that within that book lay a spell capable of unlocking a person's latent magical potential. Athanasia decided to try it. Carefully, she drew the intricate sigil on the ground and recited each word of the incantation with great precision. But the moment she finished, the book suddenly glowed and shot off into the air. She chased after it and accidentally collided with a man. That man happened to be secretly investigating recent disturbances in the flow of time. At first, he doubted his own eyes, thinking he must have mistaken her for someone else, for he couldn't believe the little girl before him could possibly be connected to the distortions of fate itself. Just then, Felix arrived to fetch the princess. But with a mere snap of his fingers, the man put Felix under hypnosis, erasing all memory of what he'd seen and sending him away obediently, leaving Athanasia alone with the stranger. The man introduced himself as the strongest sorcerer alive. His voice was low and cold, his eyes sharp as ice. He warned her that the spell she had recited was forbidden, and that if she continued, the consequences would be dire. Then, without another word, he turned and left. When Felix later regained his senses, Athanasia tried to explain that he had been hypnotized, but he only smiled awkwardly, thinking she was imagining things. The incident, however, weighed heavily on his mind. Eventually, he went to see Emperor Claw and expressed his concern that the princess might need a friend her own age, someone to confide in and play with like any other child. He quickly clarified that he had no connection to Duke Amphius and wasn't trying to recommend anyone, only that he truly worried for her well-being. Claw regarded him in silence for a moment before speaking, his calm voice carrying the weight of his authority. So you're saying none of us can make her happy? The question struck Felix speechless. That afternoon, peace returned to the palace. Athanasia and her father shared their customary tea time in the sunlit garden. She loved chocolate cakes most of all, but lately they had been mysteriously disappearing from the kitchen, a mystery that left her both curious and annoyed. As they sipped tea, Claw suddenly spoke in a thoughtful tone. Would you like to have a friend, my dear? If you wish, you may choose one yourself. Athanasia smiled softly and shook her head. That won't be necessary, father. I already have you, Sister Lillian, and Brother Felix. Deep down, though, her only true wish was to live peacefully until she turned 18, long enough to find a way to awaken the magical energy sleeping inside her. Athanasia once again opened the grimoire. Though the sorcerer's warning still echoed in her mind, she could not resist. She whispered the forbidden incantation once more. A brilliant blue light erupted. Deep within her soul, ancient chains of magic suddenly appeared, and then shattered, unleashing the energy that had been sealed away for years. That same book had once made her dream of her past life, and now, as the seal broke, the threads of destiny themselves began to tremble, setting off an irreversible change. Amidst the surge of power, the mysterious sorcerer, Lucas, appeared once more. His gaze was piercing, his voice calm yet sharp as a blade. I told you not to do that, he said coldly. He stepped closer, his eyes gleaming with an uncanny light as he studied her. Who is your father? You clearly carry the blood of Obalia. In the Obalian bloodline, he continued, the brighter and clearer the eyes, the stronger the magic. Yet you possess none. How strange. With that, he cast a soul sight spell, peering directly into her essence to uncover her secrets. Athanasia tried to resist, but his power was overwhelming, leaving her dizzy and weak. Lucas released her without warning, letting her body fall from the sky, as though testing whether fear or instinct would awaken her true power. But at that instant, a dark cloud appeared, enveloping her small form and vanishing before he could strike again. Athanasia fled in terror, breath ragged, yet no matter how far she ran, she could not escape him. In desperation, she recalled a protective spell she'd once read, and gritting her teeth, chanted it aloud. To her astonishment, the magic worked. A radiant barrier flared to life around her. Lucas halted, his eyes flickering with intrigue. With a flick of his hand, he shattered the barrier effortlessly. Yet, instead of attacking, he simply smiled faintly. "We'll meet again," he said. Shaking, Athanasia ran out of the forest, determined to find her father and tell him everything. But before she could reach the palace gates, her legs gave out. Blood trickled from the corner of her lips as her vision blurred and her breath grew faint.